The IBLP really emphasizes the fact that you need to have as many children as possible, but the type of people that they attract to do that are doing it in order to get a certain type of attention and to make themselves look better, and never actually seeing each child that they have as an individual who should be able to grow up and make their own choices. It's really important to note that something that really drew both of my parents into the IBLP and kept them committed to it is that it attracts people who have a difficult time dealing with authority and taking instructions from other people. And because it's so regimented, it makes it easier for you to not have to think about things, and you just follow a specific set of rules. And that attracts a bit of like a type B for people who do not want to have to think through things and will just follow. But it also attracts a type A manipulative leader who wants the opportunity to take advantage of other people. And specific to the IBLP, the way that things were laid out was very much for first generation followers to be more of the people who wanted that independence and opportunity to be the manager instead of always listening to other people. And it always felt like it was structured so that the next generation would then be the followers to make everybody happy. And that's very much how my father approached it, because he wanted all of his kids to do exactly what he wanted and could not imagine that we could possibly want something different, despite him growing up wanting freedom for himself. Something that's kind of peculiar, maybe definitely very unusual about my childhood, is that I remember pretty much every time my mom went out somewhere and brought me with her, she was always going to have a few little toys that I could play with. But if I ever got bored of those things, I could rummage through her purse and basically look at anything that was in it. And what's the significance of this? Most people will probably just be like, well, it's your mom's personal things. What's so special about that? But no, what this really represented was that even if my mom potentially had some really personal things in her purse, she was willing to take the potential risk of my finding something out in order to make sure that I stayed quiet and was not getting in the way as she spoke to other people and did what she needed to. So as a child, I would end up in these situations where I was playing quietly while my mom was talking with other people or doing whatever she needed to. And it was always brought up by other people about how quiet and well-controlled I was compared to their children, and they would want to know how my mother did it. And any sort of praise that I got was a direct reflection of how good it made her look, and was never really a direct acknowledgement of what I was doing for that to happen. And same with my father. It was always about how it made my parents look better, and not about the effort that I was putting into it myself. My parents basically always thought that kids were super cute until we A, started talking back to them and proving that we had our own opinion, or B, we just no longer brought them the attention that they had wanted. And both of those things started happening more the older that we got. So my parents kind of had a sweet spot of when they really liked me and my siblings. And for pretty much all of us, that was the first couple years. And then after that, once we became more independent, it was less enjoyable. And that always goes back to the fact that my parents no longer had control over what we were thinking as easily, and they realized that we had that innate response of wanting to become an independent person, which was against everything that the cult wanted. I should also point out that despite all of the difficulties that I have faced since having to figure out how to leave home and figure out life on my own in the real world, something that did end up working in my favor was the fact that for all of the show that my parents put on, making it seem like they were such perfect parents, they appeared to be physically so present, but were emotionally incredibly absent. And this led to a disconnect from a very young age for me, which started showing up really clearly around 4 or 5. And this happened much more frequently as my parents started to take missions trips, because they had connections through a family in Haiti and would go down there and help with spreading the word of Christ, because according to the IBLP, that was one of the best ways to appear like you were committed to your faith. And people would do this sacrificing their own family's needs and spending extensive time away from them in order to spread the word of God, which was one of the key tenets of IBLP. So my parents would be spending weeks at a time out of the country, far away from me, and during these times, a lot of my siblings were not old enough yet, or there were other reasons why they could not take care of me. And so I would instead be taken care of by some of my parents' friends. And I would say any good character traits and qualities that I have as a human, I accredit far more to these families that took care of me during that time than I do to my parents. With one particular couple, there was a level of consistency and reliability that led to me feeling much more stable with them and feeling like they actually cared about my well-being as a person, and not just how cute I looked or how I would make them look to other people. They were very grounded, and I actually really enjoyed my times with them for this reason. And once I got to know them more, a few visits in where they were caring for me, it got to the point where there was such a close bond that I knew I could rely on, that when my parents would come and try to pick me up, I would refuse and would not want to go with them, and I would want to stay with this couple instead. And even if I couldn't phrase it clearly, I would show with body language by going back to the couple and not wanting to go to my parents. And because my parents realized this was going to be a very consistent problem as they kept going on those missions trips, they started to rely on either A, bringing a sibling with them so that they could help me with the transition, or B, just sending a sibling to pick me up. And then I would actually go with less hesitation because I could rely on my siblings' care. And it felt like I did not know my parents at all, and they could not think through that and figure out the true issue, or were just choosing to ignore it, so they figured out a workaround. This whole idea of me and my siblings getting praise from our parents, specifically for things that would make them look better versus things that we had done well or different things we had progressed in ourselves, gave a really twisted mentality that made it difficult to understand if our parents had ever actually really been proud of us, or if they were just proud of how we had made them look. And it led to a lack of authenticity with my childhood, which I think really contributed to my disbelief in them ever possibly truly wanting to get to know me beyond how I made them feel. So sayings like, "I'm so proud of you," or "You did such a great job," or "Keep up the great work," in a normal parent-child relationship, you would know to be authentic and you wouldn't have to question it. And as the child, you could know for sure that your parent really is proud of you and they have no ulterior motives. You don't have to think about that. But with my parents, I couldn't really believe that. I had to always question, and I remember starting from probably age 6, 7 or so, is as far back as I can remember, legitimately always wondering if they truly meant that. And most of the time, their actions would show that they actually liked how it made them look, and it wasn't really about being proud of us at all. And at least in my experience, it seems like the older that I got, the more those times where my parents would comment on how they were so proud of me were specific to instances where I made them look better. And if I had made a different choice that was maybe more focused on something that I wanted, even if it would have also benefited them, in those instances, they would not have given me the same reassurance and praise. And that's what really helped to reaffirm my beliefs about the fact that my parents were proud of how I made them look and not really ultimately proud of me. This idea of my parents basically always telling me that I did a great job or only being positive, specifically when other people were around, was just continually reinforced as I got older. And a really big way that it was basically confirmed for me that this was always all about them is when I became a teenager and I started thinking more about leaving home. I ended up discussing some of that with my parents, and of course they said, "No, you shouldn't do that. You're meant to be here. That's God's will." Those were their words. And so I stopped bringing it up with them and started talking with my older sisters who had already left home and who would actually help me and keep it a secret. And about a year, almost 2 years after this started, I finally created a plan where I would be able to leave in just a few months with one of my sisters, and she would help me transition from home into getting a job. And my parents found out a couple months into this, which I did not want to happen because I knew they were going to be dramatic and very self-absorbed about it. But they did, unfortunately, through a friend who I thought I could trust. And their reaction to that after having a meltdown was suddenly to act like the best parents that they possibly could. And a big example of this was my dad offering me to not only get me a really great job, but to also provide me one of his vehicles completely for free, including gas, so that I could get to and from work as long as I stayed at home. And of course, that was the big, crux of everything, that I needed to be staying at home under the control of my father as a daughter until he found somebody for me to marry, and then that's when I should move out. And it really is ironic when you think about the fact that my parents are responsible for mentoring hundreds, if not thousands, of youth over their lives. And I watched all of this happen, including youth that would be sent to my father and kept under his care for a week or two at a time as part of a work camp deal where they would be volunteering and helping out at the conference center in exchange for my father helping to break them down and build them back up again to be strong, well-mentored youth that their parents would be happy with and that God would be happy with, or so they claim. And eventually the word got around from one parent to the next of them being happy about my father doing this. And so that led to even more youth coming in. And that ended up being a very dedicated way of my parents spending their time instead of actually parenting the children that they gave birth to. And then they turn around and wonder why a lot of us want nothing to do with them and really do not respect them at all as human beings. It was also really significant that after I had left home, and starting a couple months into this period when I believe my parents started to realize everything they were missing out on because they no longer had my free help, they started not only giving more offers about providing more freedom and giving me basically what I had always asked for from home, which was just the freedom to choose and be independent without depending on them. It wasn't just that, it was also considering separate housing for me so I wouldn't have to live with them, or trying to tailor to my job preferences more, or my dad sending me $1,000 thinking that could be an appropriate way to bribe me to come back home. And the absolute irony of all of this is the fact that my dad seems to be wholly convinced that as long as he followed all of the rules and did what the IBLP instructed, he would essentially be able to get all of his children and his wife to be manipulated and become like the robots that he wanted us to be to keep him happy. And honestly, life just does not work that way. Not only do your kids genetically have predispositions to behave exactly like you did at their age, kids just want to grow up and have freedom. It's innate to being a human. So no matter how much my father wanted to try and train that out of us, the whole train up a child in the way he should go only goes so far in terms of behaviors when you're thinking about genetics and what you've passed on to the next generation. So that was a very big oversight on my parents' behalf, along with general leaders of this cult. This past Christmas was honestly one of my most enjoyable holiday seasons in a long time with family, and I attribute a significant amount of that to the fact that neither of my parents were present. It was siblings only and maybe a few very close friends or other relatives, but not our parents. And as I've been reflecting more on my upbringing, I think a lot of that really does boil down to the fact that my parents chose to have kids because of the attention that it would give them, and not because we were separate human beings that they wanted to help raise and teach about life. A little caveat that I should mention, and should already be known by people, but just to be crystal clear, whenever I use the phrasing, our experiences, or refer to my siblings, I'm referring in general about the fact that we all had very similar treatment from our parents, and this is not meant to represent their exact experiences, because I can only speak to my personal experience completely, and will leave my siblings' stories to their own decision about if and when they want to share that. but this is my story and me telling my truth, and not necessarily a reflection of them.